Hello and welcome to Legendary Leaders, the podcast. My name is Kathleen O'Sullivan and I am the host of this show. And together with a wide range of legendary leaders and experts in the field of leadership of self and others, we are going to explore concepts and ideas that show you how you can move past potential fears, negative self-talk and constant doubts in order to encourage you to becoming a legendary leader yourself, with far more natural impact, influence, and inspiration. We want you, to be at your best, and to show up in the most authentic way. So, are you ready for it? Well, welcome once again to Legendary Leaders, the podcast. Welcome to today's show that I'm going to be leading with Marcus van Alphen, and it's going to be a very interesting, and I'll even want to say emotional conversation. Not that the two of us get emotional as such, but we talk about all things emotions. Perhaps you have been wondering how much emotion is too much emotion at work. Are emotions actually something that's accepted? Should I express my emotions? I hear quite often, I'm really careful about how much I share. I'm not going to get vulnerable. And then there are some people who feel absolutely free to show their authentic self with all the emotions that are popping up. And there's no right or wrong as such, but there is a way to go about emotions in the sense that drives engagement, happiness, connection, belonging at work. And there is a way to literally ignore emotions and not pay attention to the emotions of others that might drive exactly the opposite. And that's why I thought having Marcus here today as a guest would be more than insightful and helpful if you want to become a legendary leader, or as Marcus would say, an excellent leader. And that's one of the topics we discussed today. What is an excellent leader? What makes an excellent leader? We are also going to be talking about suppressing emotions and the risks of such, but also the benefits of opening up about emotions and embracing the emotions of others. We are going to be talking about a concept called observational listening. What is that and why is it so important? And why does it make our work life far easier? Right? Let that sink in. It makes our work life far easier if we listen far, far better. And what it entails, well, Marcus is the best person to share with us. But let me introduce Marcus to you. Renowned leadership psychologist and author of more than 15 books in Dutch and English, Marcus van Alphen developed the observational listening concept in 2014. Observational listening is actively listening to what an individual has to say, observing them and understanding what emotions are going on inside. And if a leader is attentive to the story and the underlying emotions, the employee feels heard, seen, acknowledged, and psychologically safe, resulting in increased happiness, motivation, success, and success for the leader, for the individual, for the team, for the business. You can literally see it in the bottom line. So it's an investment that's important to be made. For his firm, The Excellent Organization, Marcus helps leaders and individuals worldwide increase workplace and personal relationship effectiveness, transform their environments, and succeed. As a restorative practitioner, he also is called in to resolve incidents and initiate the process of conflict resolution, as well as train others to implement the restorative approach. And Marcus is going to share the one or the other example of how he goes about it, what he has been realizing and noticing when working with his clients here on the show. So by all means, not only enjoy this show, but be really intentional about listening in and taking away one or two steps that you may want to put in practice or into practice more consistently, that will make a whole lot of a difference to how you work, the environment you're operating in, and the impact you have on others. Enjoy today's show. Oh, Marcus, I have been looking forward to meeting you again and delve deeper in all the wonderful topics around emotions, emotional regulation, emotional recognition, and dealing with our emotions. And for the listeners, it will be ever so slightly later, but for us, it's pre-Christmas. You're dialing in from Spain. I'm dialing in from Germany today. And yeah, it's not too far away, 12 days.
Christmas is coming.
It is coming. And what's coming with Christmas for me is emotional management, in particular when I know I will be with my parents. And as much as I love her, with my mother. But despite the best intentions in trying to keep the calm and prepare a lot in advance and so on and so forth, there always seems to be extra tension. So in your line of work, what is it you are noticing ahead of Christmas or special events in the year?
Well, to me, there's not so much difference to most of the events that seem to happen in people's life the whole time. So you're mentioning, okay, so you're going to go and visit your parents. I noticed this with some of my clients as well, whether it's for Christmas or a birthday or just a weekly dinner, that sometimes emotions are a rather, shall we say, interesting subject.
Indeed. And in my family, we often, and I try to remember my childhood long time ago, but we often would have fought, so having arguments, big discussions, and I would watch my parents and grandparents fight and discuss and so on. But I've never really seen quote unquote healthy conversation about what are the emotions at play, why are they there, how do expectations, for example, get in the way, and I wonder how can we embrace emotions and make our lives a little bit easier by doing so.
Sure. But straight away, this whole idea of what is an appropriate way of having a conversation, I've also learned in my experience that just because it's not my way of having a conversation doesn't mean it doesn't have a value. It doesn't mean that people don't also get things done, even though their methods that they use in coming to these agreements don't really fit with the kind of a person I am. I think a great part about it isn't so much that, but more how you deal with your own emotions and how you start understanding that they're there for a very good reason.
How do we do that?
How do we do that? It's quite an interesting one because I have clients with all kinds of emotional issues. And probably the one thing that is common to all of them is that quite often it's about negative emotions, and quite often it's about not wanting to feel those negative emotions. And probably the first question then arises, can I influence my own emotions? And, in conversation with my clients, we generally come to the same conclusion. No, you cannot. Your emotions are there. So you do not influence your emotions. Your emotions are there and they influence you. So just that first little bit of acceptance of I have emotions, I'm allowed to have these emotions as well, because that's step 2. A lot of people, for example, are taught in their childhood, you're not allowed to be angry, for example. When you think about that, that's almost impossible. I mean, how are you going to live a life that anybody can do with you whatever they want and you don't get angry?
Yeah.
So understanding that the emotions, A, are there, that B, you have very little influence over the emotion itself, and C, they're allowed to be there. That to me is already a really solid foundation, because then you can start doing something about them.
And now I think I shared this example with you from a perspective of a mother. It has become to me also so clear that when I sit with my son's emotions, for example, when he has a huge tantrum out of the blue, he's only turned 3, so he's very, very young. That the emotion I need to deal with is mine.
Yes, not his.
Not his. He's got it. That's what it is in this moment. And I now have a choice. I sit with my emotions, and step into, Daniel Kahneman writes so nicely about a system 2 thinking, right? I step into that system 2 that's more reflective, that thinks about my response now to this emotion, which means at the same time I need to regulate myself. Because in this example that I shared with you, and for the benefit of the listeners, I shared here, I saw my husband going to my son and he was like, come on, stop this now. Yeah, stop this was the big phrase. And I know this can happen, and I'm not always perfect in these situations. And I, at some point, went over and I just hugged him. And I said something along the lines of, oh, you've got big emotions at the moment, haven't you? Yeah. And just sat with him and waited and hugged him. And that was it. And he calmed down pretty swiftly. But that was for me such a moment where I said, oh, it's about me. And the only reason why I would say stop it now is because I feel uncomfortable. We are in public. What might other people think?
Exactly.
Right?
But I mean, it's beautiful what you're saying is, in fact, you're acknowledging his emotions. You're actually already giving him a very valuable lesson at a very young age. Your emotions are allowed to be there. You're allowed to have that tantrum. Well, perhaps not the way you express the emotion, that might not always be acceptable. But having the emotion, there's no question about, are you allowed to feel upset, for example?
Yeah. I know it's a very general question and there is not one size fits all. But what are some of the typical patterns you see in individuals who may not have had the permission to express their emotions in childhood? What might you see at a later stage?
Well, I think it's not only with people who weren't allowed to express their emotions, but generally we have been brought up in our Western society with this why question always in the background. You know, why am I experiencing this emotion? Where does it come from? What's the reason why am I feeling angry, for example, or whatever? And the funny thing is, if we just talk about it philosophically, we very quickly understand that the answer to the why question very seldom solves a problem. I mean, let's say, for example, that the reason that I'm confused about my emotions is because my parents didn't deal with me adequately when it goes about emotions. Okay, that can be true, but now, does that suddenly solve my problem? No, it doesn't solve my problem. In fact, it's a very good reason for me to point a finger to my parents and say, look, it's your fault. It's not my fault. So therefore, just deal with me as I am, which to me is also not a healthy attitude. So I'm far more of the idea of, let's forget about where they come from, let's forget about why they're there, and let's have a look at what they're actually trying to tell us. You're experiencing an emotion, as far as I'm concerned, in order that you understand what in my environment is important, needs my attention, and what my needs are. And these emotions are actually trying to nudge us to go and look for what are our needs and how is the best way I can fulfill that need.
Love that. Emotions as intel to understand our needs and act upon them.
Sure.
It reminds me of a book I was, for some reason, given by one of the leaders I used to work with, but a book I really like. It's by Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress.
Oh, I love her.
And I use it in so many of my workshops that I deliver, in terms of, let's become more aware of what stress actually is and how it can help us. So I do believe we sometimes label emotions, feelings, in a way that it immediately is being associated with something negative.
Exactly.
And if our mindset is focused on the negative, it drags us down. We feel negatively. It has an impact on our overall way of being. But what you just said, and it's the same as she described in the book about stress, let's see it as a sign for a need. We can do something with it.
No, I love Kelly McGonigal's work. I mean, her TED talk of that, I think it's about 15 years ago that she gave that one in Glasgow, where she said, how to make stress your friend. To me, that was mind blowing. It really changed my whole way of thinking. and her ideas about stress I've incorporated also with emotions and working with emotions. And to me, emotions are the things that tell you, they give you information, they motivate you, and stress is that which gives you the energy to do that. And that combination to me is a brilliant combination, if you ask me.
Wow.
Mm.
And you said it was mind-blowing to you and it impacted the
Yes,
way you work.
yes.
What was it in particular that was mind-blowing to you? As an expert, I'm always curious what experts look up to and what gives them some new inspiration.
Well, look, experts, that's a relative term, because a lot of what we are expert on are still the convictions we've been brought up with. And the conviction I was brought up with was stress is bad. Stress is the enemy. We must avoid stress. Please don't have too much stress because you're going to get sick. So to me, that was already so great. It's just kicking over this. I don't know what we had called it in Dutch. We'd call it the holy house. Kicking it over and saying, "Hey, maybe we should look at this differently." I love that.
Yeah. And just that sentence, by the way, is brilliant. Maybe we should look at it differently. What are
Yes,
other ways to look at it?
sure.
So, what really drove me to wanting to talk to you on this podcast, there was quite a bit, but it's basically your mantra, your vision, and I'm going to read it out. I exist to make the world a better place by making people more empathic, more human. I love that.
Thank you.
And I wonder at the same time, how do you do that? How do you serve people?
Well, do I serve people or do I serve the world is maybe also a philosophical question in this one, rhetorical, obviously. So I think the whole field of psychology is about well-being, if you ask me. It's about how do we get people to experience a higher sense of well-being. And I believe that one way of doing that is through connection, through the connections we have with one another. And that's where empathy starts playing such an important role. And I've focused my efforts more on leaderships, organizations, and why specifically leaders is because I believe there is a lot of research that proves that you take your leader home with you every evening. So the way your leader treats you at work, the way your leader facilitates interactions in the workplace, all these kind of things have a huge impact on people's well-being and also the leader's own well-being. And I think empathy is the key ingredient into getting people to understand one another better and to just create spaces in which people can feel themselves, feel authentic. That word you've dropped as well, being authentic is exceedingly important when it comes to well-being, if you ask me. And psychological safety starts with understanding one another, if you ask me.
There was quite a bit in the insights you've just shared with us, right? Authenticity, psychological safety, empathy building, impact on or off leadership. And I would like to delve a little bit deeper into those different areas you've just mentioned. The first question that popped to my mind was, and I wasn't fully actively listening in this moment because you took me down memory lane. And this memory lane led me to experiences with the one or the other individual close to me who claim themselves that they have a real lack of empathy. And I would say it is noticeable. Yeah, I wouldn't say there is no empathy, but I sometimes wish there was more. Let's say that.
Yes.
So if you meet people, which I'm sure you do from time to time, who either claim they have no empathy or where that level of empathy is not necessarily noticeable, how do you usually help people rediscover it?
Well, you use the right term, rediscover it, because I believe everybody does have empathic capabilities. And yes, of course, we differ in the degree to which we have that. But some people are more empathic or are more empathic than others. That's I don't think that's a point of discussion. The thing is that there is also research that shows that empathy isn't a fixed quantity. In other words, it's something you can learn to develop. And it does take some conscious effort, of course. But helping people to become more empathic, it is possible. It is possible.
How?
How?
Yeah, how can we
Yes,
learn
yes.
it?
I know that in a lot of my trainings, the way I get people to become more empathic is by doing what we call role playing. And I know a lot of people hate role playing because I think it's all difficult and it's not real, etc., etc., etc. But the funny thing is, I get them to play the role of their team member and not to play their own role. And I get other people to come up with the issues that they're coming up with. And in experiencing this, not in their role as leader, but in their role or in their imagined role as a team member, they feel what another person does to them. And by helping them pay more attention to what they feel in that conversation, they start getting more feel also as to how the other person could feel in the similar situation. You know, some definitions of empathy say that you feel the same emotions as somebody else. Well, to me, that's an impossibility because emotions are very private, they're very personal. So you can feel a similar emotion, but you never know whether it's exactly the same emotion. And to me, that's empathy, is coming with a good approximation in your own mind, in your own body, and your own feeling, your own experience as to what would that other person possibly be experiencing in this situation here and now.
So it is really an experience with regards to putting myself into someone else's shoes, or at least trying my best to imagine their world.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's also, I mean, my catchphrase is called observational listening. That's the step above what most people call active listening. And that's really about adding this layer of emotion and empathy to your active listening skills. And in doing that, you understand better where the other person's coming from, and the other person feels heard easier or quicker, which helps you get to deeper conversations in an almost effortless way. And I believe that just having that ability is an ideal way of changing the way you lead.
When I work with teams or groups of leaders, frequently individuals might ask me, what is active listening?
Yes.
Right? And you now added the additional layer of emotions onto it as well. So it would be wonderful to get your perspective on what's active listening and how would I as a leader practically then step into the world of observational listening, right?
Right, right. Well, let's take something simple. One of the active listening skills, for example, is to give a paraphrase. So somebody says something, and you give a short paraphrase. That's active listening. What observational listening does to make that a layer deeper is you notice in what somebody is telling what emotions are playing in the here and now whilst they are telling you this. And you thereby notice what are the important subjects for that other person in the here and now. And this informs you as to the choice as to what am I going to paraphrase. So somebody gives you a story, you can paraphrase something which is bland and has no emotion. It has a different effect on that person that when you pick out that one little subject that's definitely loaded with emotion, that other person straight away feels heard. Oh, yes, that emotion, I feel it. You know, I've been heard. That's a simple example.
I mean, this requires a huge amount of presence, right?
Yes.
Which already is required in active listening,
Exactly.
really being there with the person and listening to the verbal and non-verbal communication.
Sure.
And coincidentally, I watched a very brief video earlier on by Simon Sinek.
Yes.
So I don't love everything that Simon Sinek publishes, but this was just something I needed to hear today and to see.
Mm-hmm.
He basically shared the message around having your phone with you all the time.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, you sit at the dinner table, your phone is on the table. Even if you turn it around, it's
there.
still there.
Yes.
What are the signals you send to the people sitting with you at the table?
Sure.
Right? So now let's move back to work, where that could easily be the case. The phone is always in your hand or you put it somewhere. What are other things that we should really avoid? And I dislike the word should already in my question. But things that can get in the way.
We should avoid the word should.
Yes, indeed. But what can help us as leaders in particular be more present, because we all build certain habits that are not really useful when it comes to active and even then observational listening?
That's a really difficult question, but I mean, you've already mentioned the first one, the phone, the PC. I also give time management courses from time to time. One of the first things I say in any time management course is, how many notifications have you got on your telephone, on your PC that are distracting your attention? Because all the research on multitasking says nobody can multitask. You know, no, women cannot multitask, men cannot multitask, nobody can do it. It's far better for us to do one task at a time and to serially program our tasks. So just creating a zone in which you are not distracted is already a very important part of having. In any case, if you need to have a profound conversation, if it's about chit-chat, that's different. But if you want to talk to your team member about something that's important, whether it's personally important or work-related important, to me it makes no difference. Create a space in which as few distractions as possible are there, so that you can indeed, as you say, be fully present.
Yeah. Anything else that you would add to it? And I know it's a difficult question.
Yes, and that's maybe not so much what not to do, but what to do. Because I prefer always looking at not so much at that which we shouldn't do, because that what we shouldn't do is difficult to stop doing that unless we can replace it with something else, which we should be doing or which we could be doing. So I like looking at, okay, so what can you do? And to me, the most important thing is get curious. Just get curious. Stop thinking that you have all the answers. Just admit that you don't have all the answers, and you don't have to have all the answers. If you did, what would be the purpose of your life if you knew everything? It would be damn boring, because you'd already know what's going to happen up front. So just this acceptance of, hey, it's okay. I don't need to know everything. I don't need to have all the answers. Let me get curious as to how the other is experiencing this. To me, that's one of the biggest buffers to actually allow yourself to be present. And
then to ask some great questions to express your curiosity, right? That again can demonstrate how well you are listening.
But that's again, that's one of these brilliant points is we're a society where we've been brought up to tell people. You know, we tell people what they should think, what they should feel, what they blah, 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 what. Exactly. So how about we stop telling people so much and we start asking more questions? It's really a very simple intervention, and I believe it has quite huge impact.
I believe so too. And let's talk in a moment about the potential impact, in particular when it comes to leadership. Sure. However, I'm going to ask you somewhat a why question indeed now. Right? What might be the underlying emotions of somebody who needs to at least be perceived to know everything?
Well, I believe that a lot of what we do has got to do with our feeling of self-esteem. And for some people, it's difficult not to have all the answers because then they feel that I'm not worth that much. So, and it's sort of a paradox if you think about it. Because on the one hand, of course, you cannot know everything. I mean, logically, it's just not possible. So the people who are, how should I say this, are somewhat higher in their self-esteem, they find it easier to be vulnerable. They find it easier to say, well, I don't know the answer. So let's discover.
And I remember when that changed for me, where I just felt able to be more vulnerable and safer to be more vulnerable, and the impact it had on me as a person, not just in leadership, as a whole person.
Sure.
It's literally liberating. It's freeing. It's beautiful, and the connections you build, as you highlighted earlier on, are very different. And that takes us back indeed to the point you've made. It has an impact.
It has a huge impact. I can add to that as well. I mean, the feedback, the word feedback in organizations, I see everybody is being sent on these trainings to give your colleague feedback, etc., etc., etc. And I think, oh my God, what are we doing? We're asking people to give unsolicited advice to others. You're approaching it, if you ask me, from completely the wrong direction. I mean, somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to give you some feedback. You're going to go into one part of your brain, and that's the anxiety section. Because somebody's now going to tell you something that you're not doing properly, or you could be doing better. So this cannot feel good. This is my point. So giving somebody unsolicited feedback, I don't know, I question how much of that actually really enters into that other person's consciousness. And the solution is so simple. Just ask questions. Just ask questions. Well, one of my proposals is to ask the question, I notice you're doing this, and this way. Explain to me, I'd like to understand. Maybe I can even learn something from you. And that's a different attitude, saying, hey, I see you do this and this way. You should rather do it that way. And I'm keeping it very short in this case. And
I'm to a large extent with you, right? In terms of asking more questions and sharing the curiosity here as well. I think the question that just popped up to me was, what if you have some real tough nuts to crack? I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, but sometimes you have these conversations, you start with curiosity, you agree on something that may need to be changed, like disrespectful behavior towards colleagues, all of this juicy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you don't see a change. At some point, you have to be very, very clear on what needs to change from my perspective.
Definitely. Look, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And this is also the whole subject of, or the whole question. Some people say, yes, empathy. Are we going to be soft and cuddly and huggy all day at work? No, that's not what empathy is about. Empathy is about understanding where somebody else comes from, and it gives you information. That doesn't mean you always have to act on that information in one standard way. So you act on that information as to what is appropriate in this situation that you are in right now. And the same information can lead to completely different reactions in different situations. So indeed, if somebody simply won't change their behavior and they're being disrespectful to other people, there comes a point in time that you can understand where they're coming from. You can ask questions as much as you want, and yet you're going to have to choose a different way to approach them to get a change in their behavior.
I think in those moments, it's still important that you come from a perspective of care.
Sure.
If we stick to the behavior of disrespect towards someone else, it's care for this person that was disrespected, to support them. but
And also
also,
care for the person who is being disrespectful.
yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So still, Kim Scott highlights it so nicely, being clear in terms of the feedback, the conversation, but with a lot of care, because what we don't want is to put them down and just make them feel less worthy.
And then you have the exact answer, why empathy? Because without empathy, how can you care?
So what is the impact on the world around you when you're more empathic, when you're listening more actively and deeply and observationally? What might change for us as leaders?
Well, again, I grab to the research that just shows that happy employees, people who have well-being, they perform better, they stay at their jobs, they don't change jobs so quickly, so it's good for retention. It's good for so many things. There's less sick leave taken for people who are feeling happy at work. There are so many reasons why we would want happy employees, if you ask me. Also, corporate social responsibility, that's also one of these whole themes. It also says one of your most important stakeholders are your employees. You know, look after your employees, you're looking after the sustainability of your organization. You're making sure that your organization will still exist in 10, 15, 20 years' time, just by looking after people. So I don't believe there's much reason not to do this. I think I've missed the question now, but that's up to you to just check me on this one.
No, you didn't miss the question. You answered it to 50%.
Okay,
so
but which is the other 50%?
What's the impact on the wider organization, the people, all right, which is so important. And I love that we actually speak about happiness here at work as well.
Yes.
The other part is really about the leader. So let's say we are talking about leaders who are rediscovering their empathy, you know, leveling up their level of empathy as well. There's clearly something in it for them as well.
Oh,
as
yes,
individuals.
most definitely. Most definitely. I think that one of the things, look, I also get leaders in my practice, leaders who've gone burnout. And I'll take a very simple example. Some of them come because they have the idea, I'm the leader, I need to show people how to do stuff, I know everything. So literally what happens is they make themselves irreplaceable. A team member comes in with a problem. What does the leader do? Solves it for them. Okay, if you keep solving the problems your team members come with, what's going to happen is team members aren't going to solve anything themselves. Why should they? It's far easier just to bring it to you because you're going to solve it for them, which is going to overload you and is going to put you in a situation eventually that you fall over. So just understanding how people work and that people, for example, have these three basic needs. Self-determination theory, Daisy and Ryan points this out. We have this need for connection. We have this need for mastery or competence, as some people call it. We have this need for autonomy. Just understanding that already as a leader and understanding, hey, these three needs, I need them, but so does the other. And by helping the other to develop that, I'm actually also helping myself. Because when I have happier employees, when I'm looking after their three basic needs, they're no longer putting this claim on me to solve everything for them. So I become, instead of somebody who's pulling and pushing, I'm just there to support people. And supporting people, I don't know about you, but it feels good, if you ask me. It feels good when you support somebody and you see that it has an effect on them.
The word that came up for me as well is belonging.
Yeah.
You know, you show empathy towards others, you show towards yourself, hopefully, as well, because when you develop it and grow it, it will have a personal impact on you. You support others, as you so beautifully highlighted. And what's coming up is this sense of connection, as you mentioned earlier as well, and belonging.
Sure.
You know, one of the core needs that we do have as well, as to whether we want to belong to loads of groups or to one, it doesn't matter.
No, we want to belong.
Yeah.
Period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's so important. And I was just thinking about someone I spoke to this week, and we spoke about emotional regulation in heated situations, right? When
Right.
it feels tough in that
Yes.
situation to
Sure.
be empathetic or empathic and to listen actively and care.
Yes.
And one of the individuals said, well, I just push all my emotions to the side because they have no place at work. And you can imagine, I asked a few questions. So where do you put them? What do you do with them?
Left pocket, right pocket.
And when are they going to pop back up? And how do you deal with them then? Or are they just like magic gone? And I have to be fair, though. The world I grew up in, let it be with my family or let it be just the culture I grew up in, was very strongly focused on performance.
Yes.
Emotions at work, what is that?
Oh, come on.
And there was this big container of be professional.
Exactly.
Whatever that means.
And keep your professional distance in all your interactions with everybody.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost unimaginable today. Still existing, though.
It does. I think it exists a lot more than we think it does. Many people I speak to still have this exactly what you just said. You know, professionally, emotions, no, we should be rational. We should maintain this professional posture, distance, etc., etc. I don't know. To me, it's like asking people, please don't breathe at work. Because, I mean, you don't need to breathe at work. Breathe has got nothing to do with it, has it?
No, we don't need that at all.
But.
And by the way, breathing is such a wonderful technique, right? Proper belly breathing to sit with our emotions.
And maybe that's the question on emotion regulation. I don't know if it's so much regulation. I remember a client, she came to me with anger management issues. And she had quite hefty anger management problems, let's put it this way. So in terms of length of fuse, she simply didn't have one. So as soon as something didn't go her way, she exploded. Okay, so now how are you going to help somebody like this? I mean, before they know it, they've exploded. And so now, here we have all these perfect advices that people might give you. They simply don't work because in that moment, the intensity of her emotion is so high that she sees only one option: explode. Okay, so I noticed in our conversations that she had a kind of way of breathing that went before her getting the emotions into a form of higher intensity. So she took sort of an up breath. If I exaggerate, it goes a bit like like that. I got her just to focus on that. So that is the first signal in her body that she was getting irritated. So as soon as she took that up breath, I asked her to do one thing only. And that was, in that half a second, choose. And she had two choices. So no difficult choices because the intensity of your emotions up here. The simple choice, either I explode or, and then B was something else. Something simple. I'm going to walk away or whatever. That was it. And what happened is she made the choice each time. And the funny thing is, even if she chose, I'm going to explode now, and she exploded, retrospectively, she didn't feel so bad about what she'd done because she had chosen it. So sometimes I believe regulating that emotion is damn difficult. Granting yourself when the intensity of that emotion becomes high, that simple choice is a possibility.
And yet, as you mentioned, regulating emotions can be difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also tried to put myself into her shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really fully. I have never exploded like that, especially not in the workplace.
Sure.
But I'm just trying to. And I wonder if I were to get to a space where, I just feel like all of this needs to come out.
Yes.
rather aggressively, I wouldn't know how to hold in for even for this millisecond and
Sure.
choose, because that requires awareness in this moment.
Exactly.
Whereby
And that's the point I made, is I actually made her aware of something in her body. And because that preempted her actually exploding and or preceded her actually exploding. So just noticing a particular way of breathing in her case, and she could just focus, she only needed to focus on that one simple little thing. And for her, it was that, I've mentioned this to other people as well, is when I started looking at when I start feeling tense about something, I feel that in my body. And I wanted to know, where is the first place that I feel it? Because everybody feels it eventually in their gut, or most people do. But I wanted to know, even before it comes to my gut, where can I feel it even quicker? And I found out my right hamstring starts tensing up. And that actually, to me, is a signal, okay, right, we're going into that tension. Even before that tension has come there. So a lot of what I help people with is getting back into their own body, is understanding, hey, my body has wisdom. My body is giving me these emotions for a reason. So coming back into touch with our bodies, I believe, is a very important aspect of emotions. And where possible, you don't regulate the emotion, you regulate your reaction to the emotion, if you ask me.
that's a beautiful insight. Yeah, you regulate your reactions to the emotions. Today's podcast is sponsored by Inner Professional Online Training Programs. With courses geared specifically for legendary leaders, Inner Professional provides an extraordinary catalogue of leadership and professional development programs unlike any online training you've experienced before. Hone your conscious and authentic leadership skills with peer group networking communities, direct engagement with live experts, and a wealth of compelling, easy to engage on-demand content. Learn more at kathleenmerkel.com/innerprofessional. I'm a huge fan of embodied leadership and becoming more aware of those signals in your body.
Sure.
I find it very, very difficult.
Yes.
Because as you said, quite often we feel it in our gut. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then where does it start? And I'm like, how do you find out where it starts? How do you get there?
Yeah. I don't know. The only way you really get there is by awareness, about sort of being more aware. Okay, so my body's going to tell me stuff. So when I feel that in my gut, can I also think back what went before that? And it's not so much thinking, it's really about feeling, and you're doing this in the moment. So if for me, for example, tension was an issue, I noticed that when I get tense, then I start, for example, listening not so well, that I repeat myself more often than I should, perhaps, and I explain myself more than I should. So for me, it was important to find out, okay, when can I feel, there it is, that I can be in front of that tension and choose my reaction accordingly.
I am delighted to hear that you are work in progress too.
Oh, please. As I said, this is the same with leaders. Why would you want to be perfect? There simply wouldn't be any purpose to our life anymore.
Yeah, it wouldn't be as much fun at all.
Far too predictable. It would be boring.
But I want to come back for one moment to environments that are all about, we've got to be professional.
Yes.
Right? Emotions, what?
No.
And when you step into an environment like that, it doesn't have to be a whole organization. Perhaps it's a certain team, right?
Sure.
What is it you are noticing, you are seeing, you are not seeing?
Well, I think as we become more empathic, we understand where people are coming from. If somebody, let's take somebody who is being a little bit angry. if we understand why that person is angry, or where that, not so much where that anger is coming from, but sort of, hey, okay, this anger, and we are far more curious about this anger instead of just telling people, hey, stop being angry. Being more curious about this anger and being more empathetic and saying, okay, so tell me a bit more about this. I see you're upset. What's upsetting you? How can I help you? How can I support you? How can others support you? You're having a completely different conversation.
But just to again focus on teams that are not like that.
Yes.
Right? The leader would have a clear mantra that says, you've got to be professional. Yes. There's no space for emotions on our team. What's going on there then? What are the risks? What might be happening? Better question would be, what are you noticing when you enter these kind of teams and environments?
Well, basically what you're noticing is there's no safety. There's no psychological safety. And if there's no psychological safety, it means that you keep your mouth shut. It means that when things go wrong, you point fingers. It means that, simply the overall quality of what gets done in that team becomes less innovative. I mean, let's face it, if something goes wrong and you've been taught that we have to be professional, emotions can't be in it, you're actually saying you must defend yourself. You must stay professional. You say, well, the mistake isn't my doing. No, the mistake is because Department X didn't deliver on time. Yeah, pointing fingers. So we have to justify our actions. And to me, justification, I'm not saying that you must never justify something, but in general, we justify far too much.
Instead of?
Well, often we just simply we can just leave it behind. I mean, this is the same question when people need to tell another person no. And they have to give a no answer. A lot of people say no, and then comes a huge explanation because of this, and because of that, and because of this, and because of that, and this is that, and that's the. What are you doing? Why the necessity to expound to such a degree on all the reasons why you are now saying no? Because the effects, well, they're not very good on yourself, for one. And secondly, the other person is not going to hear your no anymore. They're thinking of all the things that they can hook into to prove you're wrong and that you should say yes. So this is this typical interaction you see in teams where we have to remain professional. Because that means everything I do, I have to justify.
And I'm smiling away here because I remember when I moved from Germany to the UK, and I think it was just my second job in the UK, and a colleague of mine was asking me a question, and call it my Germanic way or call it just Kathleen's way, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. I said no, because the answer for me was no. And I still see her sitting right in front of me in disbelief, utter surprise and shock that someone could just say no. And she said to me, this is not something we would say here. You can't just say no. and then I had an input from my manager who said, you cannot say no here. You have to say yes, however, and explain the risks. Mm-hmm. And that really stuck to my mind. And then coming back to the topic around psychological safety, in the future, I was always thinking about, am I expressing myself correctly now? Am I being too direct? How should I be communicating this? What are the things I can make up to basically get to a no, despite the fact that we can put it on the table pretty quickly? And did it impact me in a very negative way? No. Yeah. But I questioned myself certainly more often than usual.
Sure. And actually, you're saying you couldn't be authentic.
Not 100%.
Exactly. Yeah. But it immediately raises another very interesting thing, and that's the language issue. We love the word "but" in English. We love that word. And yet so often it gets us into trouble, because actually, especially when people say yes, but they're actually just saying no. And somehow, I don't know, I talk sometimes about what we call the language of leaders. And one of the things I've noticed with good leaders is that they tend to use the word and more often than they use the word but, and often instead of the word but. So they're actually saying it's not the one or the other, which is what the word but actually implies. It's the one or the other, but it's the one and the other. They can coexist next to each other. And just by creating this possibility of coexistence of different opinions already makes it a lot easier for people to voice their opinions. So that just that small thing already creates more psychological safety than what we can imagine. Language.
And I think it is important to be able to express what you're thinking.
Sure.
Right? And pair it nicely, as you mentioned earlier on, with the curiosity. Yeah. Because at the same time, a key learning for me as a leader at this time was also to not be too quick about my no's. Because sometimes the no's were right and they were probably the best way forward. And sometimes I wished I would have said more often, help me understand what's the purpose behind something.
Yes. Well, this fits exactly also with I sometimes have people who come from an Eastern culture, and in an Eastern culture, it's just not done to say no. So they say yes, they say yes, they say yes, and then they manage to get a burnout. Not weird. Why? It's because they're simply saying yes to everything, whereas we've sort of been taught it's also okay to say no every so now and then. And teaching them how to say no is almost impossible. I mean, it's ingrained in their culture. Mm. As soon as there's a question that starts with a verb, the answer is yes. End of story. So what I really help them with is by not saying no anymore, or not saying yes anymore, but asking questions. Exactly like you said. Help me understand. What's the importance of this job? Help me understand. When must it be done by? Please tell me which other tasks I can drop in order to make time for this. All these kind of questions, they're not saying no.
And in order to do so, don't you need to feel psychologically safe?
Yes. Although some of these things you can even teach people to do these kind of things in psychologically unsafe spaces. I mean, just simply asking questions. If you are the team member and your supervisor comes and drops a job on your table and says, please see to it that this is done by this afternoon, and you can't for various reasons, it might be a very unsafe way of approaching it. And even then, by just asking questions, somebody can get a better result.
Now, I want to pause for one moment because we have been touching upon psychological safety, authenticity, happiness, you mentioned very briefly overall. And I think we should publish some research that you have generously shared with us prior to this call about happiness at work. Mm-hmm. And now the most cynical people might say, if I now have to worry about happiness of all of my team members, I don't get any work done. And yet it's exactly the opposite. By focusing on the people, on their happiness, and as you highlighted so nicely, on their well-being, you can create real business results, can't you?
Well, it's good for your business because in fact, people work for a different reason. Look, it's fine that some people come and only work for their salary, but really, that's especially in high tech and innovative spaces. You don't want people just to come and work for their salary. You want them to come and work because you want them to perform. You want them to do beautiful stuff. Now, how are you going to do beautiful stuff if you're not in a space of well-being? I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer.
And it's fantastic that you mentioned the high-tech industry, right?
Yes.
That requires a different way of being.
But you collaborate. There's in high-tech industry, it's never something you do on your own. It's almost always a team effort. You need to collaborate, you need to work with one another, you need to inspire each other. Otherwise, it's simply not going to happen. And that needs this safe space in which it's possible.
And I actually spoke to a senior leader in a tech company yesterday, and he said to me, you constantly need to call things out because it will have an immediate, in their sector at least, an immediate impact on the user, the end user, i.e. the customer in this moment.
Yes.
And there are huge risks if you miss this small detail, this tiny detail in the tech process and the development process, that you will have to invest years of work after, huge costs involved and so on. So if you don't create an environment of speaking up, of psychological safety, you are going to be in trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the story of somebody, a director in a company, and she decided, I'm not going to follow the rules when it comes to hiring new people. I'm going to look at people who I've worked with in the past that I know have certain skills and expertise, and I'm going to hire them straight, directly, and without going through the whole procedure. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. Because who were the people she hired is actually people she liked. And who were the people she liked? People who agreed with her. So she had a complete team of everybody who agreed with everything she said, and nobody even gave the critical signals about anything. You can understand what happens.
And often the people we like are those that are quite similar to us, right?
Exactly. And have the same ideas and won't come with critical comment.
So that's a recipe for failure, or at least for a bit of drama until you realize.
Especially if we talk about innovative environments, it's deadly. It's deadly.
Yeah. And I've read a Harvard study a few years ago, so I can't really tell you what year it is from, but it was about diversity. Yes. And they basically took the examples of two startups. One startup was made of very similar people. They all came from Harvard, were mates in their dorm, and formed that business. And the other startup was far more diverse. You had females, for example, on the board. You had different backgrounds in knowledge and expertise, in personality, and so on and so forth. They measured over a period of time the financial success of both. And surprise, surprise, the more diverse organization was the more successful one. Right.
That's again,
yeah, exactly. And that's not the point, or the only point I'm trying to make. That leads me to the next question for you. What they also highlighted were the challenges both were going through, right? The first one, we get on really well and great conversations. The more diverse one, conflict, arguments, really storming and forming, trying to get together to become this one team. And it was described as being very tough ride to grow together.
Sure.
So conflict was on the card quite regularly.
Yes.
Yeah. How do we overcome these kind of conflicts, in particular in the beginning, when we have such diverse expertise and backgrounds on board, so that we keep going? Because conflict can demotivate us as well, right?
I'm wondering, we generally tend to avoid conflict. So we're looking for ways to avoid conflict. And I'm thinking, why don't we turn it around? So what if we invite conflict? And by inviting it, and I don't mean let's have a fight now. That's. I'm really saying if we as a leader are able to play a good role model and say, hey, people, we need to approach ABC. And people come with ideas and say, okay, now let's play devil's advocate. What can possibly go wrong? And by inviting people to actually criticize that which is being put on the table, you as a leader are inviting this, eh? You're actually creating a space where it's okay not to agree with one another on everything. And then I believe conflict becomes a positive thing, because the conflict isn't about emotions such as I hate you because you're saying something different to me. The conflict is about more things that really are crucial to coming up with good solutions to the issues we're faced with.
Now, with you, I'm very conscious of my choice of words.
Oh dear.
Right? So I'm already contemplating how to say it, but I just say it anyway. What might be the rules of engagement around it? Because not everybody, or it doesn't come naturally to everybody to say, let's play devil's advocate. Let's have this open dialogue about different perspectives. So what needs to be in place to be able to get the best out of this healthy conflict you described?
Well, again, we're coming back to psychological safety. Because if you say, let's play the devil's advocate, and you come up with a criticism for my idea and I chop your head off, I'm actually saying, let's not play devil's advocate. So it's really about, and this is where I believe a leader has such an important role model function for the people that they lead. If you do something as a leader, you're actually showing your team members it's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for dissent. It's okay to ask for critical comments, all these kind of things. And then, of course, not chopping people's heads off if they respond. I mean, that's actually sabotaging the whole strategy.
And it just made me think how important it is for the leader to say, you play devil's advocate now on something they've mentioned, they said.
Yes.
Really inviting it themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, Amy Edmondson highlights, I think it was in her book, The Fearless Organization, that the leader has this key role to play in a psychologically safe environment, to mention words like, I don't know, I don't have the answer.
Yes.
All right. I made a mistake. Let me share with you.
Yes. Yes.
Who has got a different opinion?
Yes, 100%. And by saying this yourself first, you're showing people it's okay. It's okay that I mean, why do we hire people in the first place? Are we hiring them to just to do a job? Or are we hiring them because they have particular expertise, particular competencies, beautiful things that we want in order to create something bigger than just the sum of the parts? And especially in high-tech and innovative environments, you know, we don't want everybody to be the same. No, we want people to be different, to bring different things to the table. And the synergy creates something beautiful.
And I think you will still experience both and all the shades of gray in between. Some people who hire for the one reason or the other.
Sure, but look, it's also okay that some people just work for the salary. You know what they're coming for, and you know what you can expect of them. That's also fine. But I firmly believe it's the largest proportion of people who work. They're not there for the money. Yes, they need the money. Yes, they need the salary. But most people choose a profession, choose a job because it fits with who they are. It's part of their identity. It gives them meaning, and those three needs we discussed earlier are very important reasons for going to work.
And even if you notice there are people who come for the salary, as you mentioned, being able to address that openly as well, not addressing it in terms of it has to change, but to recognize it, to acknowledge it, is important. Because sometimes
saying that's okay. And saying that's okay.
Yeah. I often say to people, not everybody will want to climb the ladder. And what would we do if everybody wanted that to happen? Right? Who's going
to do the work?
Certain jobs. So let's talk about it openly as well.
It's a bit also like the paradigm of the upside down organization. Why do we have a board of directors, and why do we have all these staff sections and what have you? They don't produce a damn thing. Yes, they're necessary, except if you look at it from the upside down point of view, they are there in order to make possible that on the level of the work floor can get done. The
You're
work is happening
absolutely
on the work floor.
you're absolutely right. Another question that popped up for me, and I'm very curious to hear your opinion, is the following. And that is a why question. Why is it sometimes the case that we behave counter opposite at work than we would behave at home? So I give you a very brief example. I've worked with two individuals in the past, long time ago, who were very quiet at home, not very outspoken, rather shy. And at work, the power was being expressed in a rather hindering way, really dominant, and so on and so forth. A lot of telling, no curiosity, all of this stuff. Why is that?
Well, of course, very almost impossible to give you an answer on that one because I don't know the specific people involved. Just speculating though, why would somebody be quiet at home and be very present in an, I'm hearing you saying almost an authoritarian way at
Very,
work?
yeah.
Then to me, the first idea that springs to mind is self-esteem. This is somebody who feels uncertain about themselves. And by putting on the show at work, they're preventing that they're shown up. If you put it differently, if you have the feeling that you aren't worth that much, would you want to display that to others? Probably not. And so therefore you would tend to overcompensate. And that's the picture I'm getting in this specific case you're mentioning. As I say, I can't say for certain, but that would be my speculation based on what I'm hearing.
I'm trying to delve deeper into the topic around authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, the signals for authenticity. When do I know that I'm being my real self?
Oh, yes, good question. I think the answer is really simple. And then we come back to your gut feel. When you feel that tension in your gut when you're doing something at work, that might very well be a signal. Please start observing what you're doing now, because maybe you're doing something that doesn't fit with whom you are.
I often describe it as feeling out of sync.
Yeah.
And again, it's important to delve into the body and the bodily experience. What does out of sync mean? Where do I feel it?
Exactly.
But for me, and I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody else here, it starts with the sense of something's out of sync.
Yes. Okay. And you probably feel that somewhere in your body.
You have written books. I call it the excellent, the Excellent Leader series.
Yes. Yes.
And when I read about your books initially, my first question that popped up, and I'm going to ask you the question here as we are approaching the end, is what is an excellent leader for you? We discussed so much, but how would you describe an excellent leader?
Well, this again comes back to this point that we've discussed earlier about what is the role of a leader. Is the leader there to push and to pull, or is the leader there to support? So I firmly believe the latter. I believe that you as the leader you're not the one who's doing the work. You're the one who's creating an environment in which people can work. And to me, that's the difference between a leader and an excellent leader. A leader can create that environment to a certain degree, perhaps. An excellent leader does that better. And I think the difference lies in the concept of empathy. I believe you cannot be an excellent leader without a fair amount of empathic feeling for what's going on with people. And again, I don't believe that empathy is about huggy, kissy, let's have a kumbaya session, etc., etc. I believe it's about having more information at your disposal about what moves people. And simply that makes it easier for you to align what you're actually asking people to do with what their values are, what they need, what's important to them. Because if you're asking people to do stuff that's important to them, they're going to do it. You don't have to motivate them. That's why they're there. That's why they chose this job. I believe the difference between an excellent leader and a leader is an excellent leader doesn't work half as hard.
Well, that's no motivation for people to become excellent leaders.
I believe it makes your work easier. I honestly do.
And I actually think of experiences in particular when applying observational listening.
Yes.
Yeah, when a lot of people would say, I don't have time for this. I can't sit down constantly with people and have these kind of conversations. It's about thinking about when to have these conversations, when to really put that effort into them. And it's beautiful effort, by the way. It feels wonderful, the sense of belonging and connection in the moment. But also to realize, as you mentioned earlier about multitasking and so on, what happens when you have these incredible conversations and how much time they can save you overall.
In the long run, they save time. They don't cost time. Yes.
It makes a whole lot of a difference.
And this whole focus on, I don't have to fix everything. I only have to support people. My primary task is to support people as a leader, not to fix everything.
I immediately had the sensation of, let's take the pressure off a bit, shall we?
Yeah.
Last question about empathy, Marcus. Empathy is wonderful. And I love that you mentioned the kumbaya feeling, that it isn't about singing kumbaya together and holding hands, right?
Right.
I think we can have an empathy blind spot.
Yes.
We feel we are so empathic and we listen so well. We pay attention to emotional states. We can put ourselves in somebody's shoes, which we will never be able to do 100%, as established.
Okay.
The question is, how can we ensure we don't misinterpret sensations, emotions?
This is again, how do you avoid your emotions? It's impossible, isn't it? So,
well, avoiding it, yeah, but misinterpreting other people's emotions.
Do you think you are 100% of the time going to get it right?
No.
No. So again, this is what I'm trying to say. Yes, we would like to be able to see what other people are experiencing. We're not always going to get it right. And this is where I believe that little bit of observational listening really comes to the rescue again. Because what am I doing with observational listening is I'm putting all my senses in as much as I can to sense what's going on in this conversation. If I misinterpret something, I'm going to notice by your reaction straight away that I got it wrong. So the answer is actually very simple. This is again vulnerability. Oh, I got that wrong. Help me understand what's going on. I'm not getting you.
It's so simple, doesn't it?
It sounds so simple. Simple but not easy.
That's a lovely, lovely close to this part of the conversation. However, I'm not going to let you go so easily, Marcus, because you have so much to offer to the world, right? How to help other people learn and grow and reflect more deeply about their own emotions, behaviors, and impact they have on others. And I'd love for you to share with the listeners how they can learn from and with you.
I sometimes say this, and it's not meant tongue-in-cheek at all. I'm not there to sell books. I don't care if thousands of people buy my books. If they don't actually use what's in them, it's a waste of time. So again, going back to why do I exist? I exist to make the world a better place by making people more empathic, more human. So actually, I want people to practice with all the various skills and things that observational listening brings them, so that they can actually do this. They can do it in real life. And I believe it's not as difficult as we think. So a large portion of what my task is, I believe, is to make people aware of what works, what they're already doing and works, and put that in more consistently, that they sort of put it in more deliberately. And by doing that, they improve what they're doing in terms of their conversations. So with that in mind, I've created a number of courses. And the first one is absolutely free, so people can just go and try it out to see whether they like me and like my style and like what I'm trying to tell them. And the idea is, I just want people to follow those courses, and I want them to actually put the things that I've discovered, which I believe are effective, into practice. And not to become a clone of me, but to actually play with them until it becomes part of who they are. I firmly believe in authenticity. So just teaching people a bunch of tricks, I don't think that's going to win it on the long run.
Love your no-nonsense approach. I'm not here to sell a ton of books. I want you to change something authentically.
Yes.
Marcus, where can people find you and find out more about your courses? And yes, we will publish them in the show notes as well, but you can tell them too.
Well, very simply, I have a website. It's called excellentleader.com. Excellent leader with a little minus sign in between, so it's still 2 words. And on that website, they can find me, they can find the courses. And of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn and those kind of channels as well.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and getting your insights and feeling positively challenged as well.
I loved having a chat with you as well. Very nice conversation we had, if you ask me.
And thank you so much to everybody who tuned in today, who listened. And as Marcus said, it is about making it a consistent effort. So really putting it into practice. So what has been one thing that you are taking away from this conversation? It can be a teeny tiny thing, but yet you feel encouraged to put into action. And if you need support and want support to build consistency, well, Marcus is clearly your man, so get in touch. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful remaining week, and speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Legendary Leaders podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then remember to subscribe to the show either on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or my website,